Today I'm going to give an update on the government shutdown, why it started, and the recent vote in Congress that enabled the government to reopen on Wednesday. I'm Peter E. Watts, and you're watching Pro-Democracy News. On October 1st, the U.S. government shut down for the first time in 7 years. It was officially closed down for a total of 43 days, making it the longest government shutdown in U.S. history. While it's true that the government is not a business, or at least shouldn't be, it operates in some ways very similar to a business. It has a financial budget, a revenue stream, expenses, debts, and debt financing, and people in charge of financial oversight. In our nation, we have three government bodies. We have Congress, which is part of the legislative branch. We have the president and his team, which are part of the executive branch, and the U.S. Supreme Court, which is part of the judicial branch. The body that is in charge of our financial budget is Congress. I know our presidents sometimes try to test that authority, but the United States Constitution gives Congress the sole authority to pass laws, collect taxes, and use those taxes for the general welfare of the nation. For those who may be unaware, in case you didn't pass your high school government class, the whole purpose of our tax dollars is not simply to pay the president's salary. It's used to fund the federal budget. Again, this is something that Congress does, not the president. So how did we get here? On October 1st, Congress members of both houses and of both political parties had failed to agree on a federal spending bill. Well, this forced the government to shut down. Some government agencies and services continued. These are called essential, and some entire agencies and services shut down. The biggest point of disagreement was over health insurance. Federal funding for Americans on ACA insurance was about to end on December 31st. This would mean that about 24 million Americans and legal residents would have their premiums double or triple come January if Congress did not agree on continuing to fund ACA in 2026. It also would mean that out of those 24 million people, 4 million of them were about to lose their health insurance entirely. Democrats in the U.S. House demanded that federal spending remain the same for insurance subsidies next year so that millions of Americans don't lose their health insurance coverage. House Republicans did not agree. They claimed that they wanted to get the temporary spending bill passed without those guarantees, but promised to revisit this in December. Democrats believed this was just a stalling tactic and didn't really want to revisit the idea in December. It is common knowledge, if you're paying attention, that congressional Republicans have been trying to get ACA insurance for the last 15 years. So because Congress was at an impasse, they couldn't fund the government, so the government had to shut down. The reasoning behind the Democrats in Congress is this. They believed that Donald Trump and Republicans were using the shutdown as a way to finally cut Americans' health insurance permanently, at least cutting federal spending for Americans' insurance permanently. So if Democrats went along with the spending bill that Republicans offered, they were essentially agreeing to end ACA indefinitely. At least that's what their view was. The greater risk would be to let 24 million people in the United States lose their health insurance, human beings. So they refused to pass the Republican-led spending bill. Here's where things start getting much, much worse and begin exposing Republicans' true intentions. 1 month after the shutdown began, on November 1st, the USDA announced that SNAP benefit funds were about to end, which would impact over 42 million people who rely on SNAP benefits to get weekly groceries. On November 3rd, the USDA clarified that it would be able to fund half of the benefits through the emergency fund, or called the contingency fund. The following day, November 4th, President Trump shares a post on Truth Social that says the following about SNAP. He says SNAP funding will be given only when the radical left Democrats open up the government. The problem with that last post is that he does not have the constitutional authority to make that kind of determination. The contingency fund is there in emergencies like this. So there was no reason at all to bully the USDA from obtaining those funds to give to Americans on SNAP. On November 6, a federal judge, Judge McConnell, ordered that the Trump administration to fully fund SNAP by Friday of that week, finding their partial payment did not comply with his original court order. The great thing about this judge's decision is that he not only ordered that the contingency fund be used to pay partial payments, he ordered that the federal government find the money to pay SNAP recipients their full payments. This is a good judge. I'm reading from ABC's Timeline article, by the way. On November 6th, the Trump administration decides to appeal this judge's decision. Let me stop there. President Trump decides to go to court to stop Americans from receiving SNAP benefits, which provide weekly groceries. Did you hear that? Well, think about it. Why does Trump ever do something that hurts others? Here's why. Whenever it appears that someone else is getting the upper hand to him and taking away the spotlight off of him, he can't stand it. The most likely reason he appealed this decision was that Democrats in Congress and across the nation were advocating for SNAP benefits to continue. Trump disagreed. The problem, though, is that by trying to stop Americans, mostly in poverty or near the poverty line, from getting groceries, the one who actually looks bad is not the Democrats, it's him. And Trump looked like the biggest asshole that ever sat in the Oval Office in history. On November 7th, the First Circuit District Court refused to abide by Trump's demands, and instead the court required that the government fully fund SNAP benefits. As a reminder, the purpose of the shutdown, at least for Republicans, was that they wanted to avoid funding ACA insurance in the upcoming year, while Democrats wanted it funded. Last Sunday, November 9th, 7 Democrats and 1 independent joined their Republican senators to pass a federal spending bill to reopen the government. This bill then went over to the House of Representatives to vote on, and Wednesday evening, the House of Representatives passed the bill and President Trump signed it into law. 6 Democrats in the House joined the majority of Republicans, while the remaining Democrats and 2 Republicans voted against the bill due to their belief that the spending bill did not go far enough. The spending bill, or also called the CR bill, provided the following. SNAP benefits would be extended through September of next year, all thanks to the pressure that the public and Democrats put on the Republicans. And ACA insurance benefits would still end on December 31st, with a promise from Republicans to vote on a further spending bill for the ACA in December. We'll see if that happens. Was it a good or bad idea to compromise on this spending bill? Democrats who voted no on the bill are extremely disappointed with their fellow Democrats who voted yes. They believed health insurance was worth fighting for and worth continuing the shutdown, while Republicans loved blaming the shutdown on Democrats, and President Trump called it the radical left shutdown. What's my take? Well, I believe Americans on ACA should still have their benefits, and it would be deeply unfortunate to see them go in January. I also see that having a government shutdown caused a lot of federal services and agencies to not function at all, or at least to not function to their full capacity. A lot of federal workers didn't get paid, which posed financial hardship on them and their families. And that's not even to mention the fact that Americans suffer when federal services are not fully functioning. So while I supported the Democrats in their initial purpose to shut down the government, to fight for ACA benefits for over 24 million people, there were other costs on the American people. Costs on businesses, costs on individuals and families, and it caused a lot of suffering. So was it worth it? Well, I think one thing that the shutdown exposed was the differing priorities of each political party. In general, Republicans in Congress, except for a few, have an ideological difference. They do not support government-funded medical insurance, at least federal funded medical insurance. If I'm wrong, prove me wrong. Even though Trump has claimed to have an alternative plan to ACA for the last 10 years, but he's never presented it to Congress. Democrats, on the other hand, do support government-funded medical insurance or federal dollars that go toward medical insurance. The progressive wing of the Democratic Party further supports universal health care. And I know some moderates have that view as well, but we're not quite there yet on funding universal health care. I hope in the near future. The shutdown also exposed that President Trump cares more about looking powerful than he does feeding the hungry and starving Americans. All of these points are things American voters should pay more attention to as the 2026 midterms approach. Until next time. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please do me a favor and hit like underneath the video. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe for more breakdowns like this. If you want to support my work, become a paid subscriber to my weekly Substack newsletter. There's also a free option. The link is in the description.